The sharp bark cut through the routine hum of JFK International Airport's baggage claim. Maxton, a 40-year-old German shepherd from the NPD Kuhdeksan unit, lunged forward with such intensity that his handler, Detective Jonathan Wright, barely kept hold of the leash. In 4 years of service, Maxton had never broken protocol until now. His hackles bristled, teeth bared, muscles taut as he strained toward an unremarkable black suitcase gliding along the carousel, his focus locked with unwavering determination. Jonathan knew better than to doubt Maxton's instincts. The security personnel carefully removed the suspicious suitcase from the carousel. Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that Maxton hadn't just found contraband. His partner was telling him they'd stumbled upon something far worse. Detective Jonathan Wright had never planned on becoming a Kuhdeksan handler. At 42, his face bore the lines of 20 years in law enforcement, haunted by the unsolved murder of his younger sister Caroline. The gold wedding band he still wore 3 years after losing his wife to cancer remained his only personal adornment. Colleagues described him as methodical and relentless, carrying each unsolved case like a physical weight. Maxton hadn't been destined for police work either. Jonathan had found him malnourished and abused during a drug raid, recognizing something special in the animal's intelligence and intuition. Over 3 years of intensive training, Maxton developed an almost supernatural ability to detect human remains, earning him the nickname the Grim Reaper among the Kuhdeksan unit. Their bond transcended the typical handler relationship. They moved as a single unit, communicated without commands, trusted each other implicitly. In the airport security wing, Richard Collins had hunched over a metal table, nervously tracing invisible patterns on its surface. When Jonathan placed a photograph of the open suitcase on the table, Collins flinched. Inside was an antique doll with a cracked porcelain face, specially modified to conceal a severed human hand. Collins identified Michael Turner as the man who had given him the suitcase, claiming it contained family heirlooms. Collins' demeanor shifted from nervous to defeated as he revealed nightmares of a young woman reaching out to him, her mouth moving without sound. Jonathan pressed further, noting Collins' trembling hands and haunted eyes, suggested a man trapped, rather than complicit, in whatever horror they had uncovered. Dr. Emily Bennett worked methodically in the examination room, documenting each aspect of the severed hand. Female, Caucasian, approximately 20 years old, the separation appeared clean-cut, consistent with a sharp, heavy implement. Her assistant photographed a tarnished silver bracelet, recovered with the remains, the initials SB, barely visible through years of oxidation. Jonathan stood silently observing until Emily acknowledged his presence with a grim nod. She had prioritized the DNA analysis, but already saw similarities to the Samantha Peterson disappearance. 3 months earlier, Samantha had vanished after her late shift at a roadside diner off Interstate 99. 22 years old, working to save for nursing school, no history of running away or substance abuse, the case had gone cold when Michael Turner, the last person seen with her, died in what appeared to be a straightforward traffic accident. As Emily examined tissue samples under the microscope, something felt off about the preservation. She hesitated before explaining to Jonathan that she was seeing patterns reminiscent of 3 other unidentified remains in their system. This wasn't an isolated case. Jonathan returned to his apartment well after midnight, spreading case files across his kitchen table. Samantha Peterson's smiling face looked out from her college ID photo. Brown hair, bright eyes, so reminiscent of Caroline that Jonathan had to look away. As he reviewed Turner's accident report, inconsistencies emerged. No skid marks, perfect angle of descent over the bridge railing, absence of mechanical failure. His phone rang, Captain Mayer demanding progress. Wrightscoot told him this case connected to his sister's murder, but Mayer wanted him off it. The similarities were undeniable. Both young women with promising futures, both vanishing without witnesses, both connected to isolated locations. Jonathan noted the newspaper clipping about Daniel Hayes' transportation company, which had employed Turner for 8 years. Michel Peterson's modest suburban home stood frozen in time, a shrine to the daughter who never returned. Rain photographs lined the entryway chronicling Samantha's life, from gap-toothed elementary school portraits to her college graduation. Michel led Jonathan to a living room where 3 months' worth of newspapers sat in neat stacks, each containing any mention of her daughter's case. When Jonathan showed Michel the silver bracelet recovered from the suitcase, her composure crumbled. "That's hers," she whispered. Michel retrieved a small leather-bound journal Samantha had kept hidden. The diary documented increasing harassment from a customer she referred to only as DH, descriptions matching Daniel Hayes. The final entry, dated 3 days before her disappearance, read, "D. Hay waited in the parking lot again tonight. Said he could make or break my future. I'm scared to tell anyone. Who would believe me against someone like him?" Samantha's former room in the old converted dormitory felt heavy with unease. Nobody stayed there long anymore. All complained about the same things. Nightmares, feeling watched, waking up unable to move. Maxton entered cautiously, his usual confidence replaced by uncharacteristic hesitation. The dog circled the room before stopping abruptly near the bed, a low whine building in his throat. Jonathan followed, crouching to examine what had caught the dog's attention. Deep gouges marked the wall beside the bed, 10 parallel lines scored into the plaster. Fingernail marks from someone desperately clawing at the wall while lying down. The landlady explained these weren't present when Samantha lived there. The girl who stayed afterward claimed someone was sitting on her chest every night, watching her. As Jonathan prepared to leave, Maxton froze, staring intently at an empty corner of the room. His ears flattened against his skull in a posture Jonathan recognized from cadaver searches, but there was nothing there, just empty space and shadow. The break-in at Jonathan's apartment was clean and professional. No fingerprints, no forced entry. Nothing appeared to be missing, but taped to his bathroom mirror was an obituary for Michael Turner with the words, "Accidents happen," written across it in red marker. An hour later, a plain white envelope slid under his door contained a photograph of Jonathan leaving Samantha Peterson's house earlier that day, accompanied by a handwritten note. "Some questions are better left unasked, Detective Wright, for everyone's sake." Jonathan's resolve strengthened as he observed a black sedan with tinted windows idling across the street. Someone wanted him off this case, which only confirmed he was onto something significant. Emily Bennett's findings confirmed Jonathan's suspicions. Turner's blood work showed high levels of zolpidem, a powerful sedative, at concentrations inconsistent with therapeutic use. The original me had missed it because they were looking for alcohol and common drugs of abuse. A pattern emerged when Emily checked unsolved cases with similar patterns in the past 5 years. 3 long-haul truck drivers had died in single-vehicle accidents within a satomile radius, all ruled accidental, all without obvious external cause. Each driver's death had been preceded by the disappearance of a young woman along their route. 2 of the deceased had applied for positions with Hayes Transport, but were rejected. The third had recently quit working for them. As Jonathan assembled a map marking the locations, the invisible threads between them became increasingly clear. Daniel Hayes' business empire sprawled across the East Coast, his transportation company merely the most visible of numerous holdings. From his office overlooking the harbour, Jonathan could see Hayes Transport's fleet of trucks lined up at the loading docks, their distinctive logo gleaming in the afternoon sun. A task force dug deeper into Hayes' background, uncovering disturbing patterns. 7 young women had filed harassment complaints against Hayes, all eventually withdrawn. 5 former employees attempted to sue for wrongful termination after reporting inappropriate behavior, all cases settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. Most concerning were the geographical connections. Hayes's travel schedule overlapped with the disappearances of 4 women in the past 3 years, including Samantha Peterson. Jonathan's breakthrough came from Hayes' former chauffeur, now working as a parking attendant after being fired for insubordination. The man described late-night drives to remote locations where Hayes met with business associates not listed in any official capacity. One night matched Samantha's last shift before her disappearance. Hayes had been furious, making phone calls, then visited the diner where Samantha worked, staying inside for about 20 minutes before emerging with a smile, saying something like, "Problem solved," into his phone. Jonathan's investigation took an unexpected turn when he faced Timothy Wright, his oldest friend since boyhood, now representing Hayes. In a tense meeting at the Waldorf Astoria, Timothy maintained professional composure despite Jonathan's accusations. The decades-long friendship strained against the immovable object of professional ethics. Finally, Timothy offered a cryptic hint. Check Hayes' connection to Eastland Shipping. It was the first crack in the Otteney client shield. That evening, Jonathan received a call from Richard Collins, assigned attorney. Collins had attempted suicide in his holding cell, leaving behind a handwritten confession claiming sole responsibility for Samantha Peterson's death. Rushing to the hospital where Collins was recovering from his wounds, Jonathan immediately recognized the confession made no sense. Details were wrong, timeline impossible, motivation absent. When Collins regained consciousness, his first words confirmed Jonathan's suspicions. "They have my daughter. Said they'd send her back in pieces if I didn't sign that paper." Collins took a shuddering breath, revealing his true identity, Richard Peterson, Samantha's father, who had abandoned his family 15 years ago. He had been searching for them for years, finally finding Samantha working at the diner where she disappeared. Recognizing his daughter's bracelet in the photograph Jonathan had shown him, Richard realized the nightmares that had plagued him since accepting the suitcase were Samantha trying to reach him from beyond the grave. The revelation transformed everything. Collins wasn't a random courier, but a father unknowingly carrying his own daughter's remains. The international hunt for Daniel Hayes unfolded across Southeast Asia with methodical precision. Interpol agents traced Hayes' movements through 5-star hotels using different aliases: Singapore, Bangkok, Phnom Penh. Each stay meticulously planned, each departure timed to stay ahead of authorities. Financial analysts uncovered a complex network of offshore accounts transferring funds through shell companies registered in tax havens across the globe. Facial recognition software identified Hayes, accompanied by Lawrence Eastman, CEO of Eastland Shipping. Timothy Wright's cryptic hint gained significance as further investigation revealed Eastland cargo ships regularly transported Hayes Transport containers through international waters with minimal customs scrutiny, thanks to high-level connections in multiple governments. Jonathan realized they weren't dealing with a lone predator, but organized crime with infrastructure and protection. DNA comparison found matches to 3 cold cases in their database. All young women reported missing near Hayes transport routes over the past decade. These weren't isolated incidents, but part of a systematic operation. Maxton's behavior changed the moment they approached the abandoned farm property. The disciplined dog became agitated, pulling Jonathan toward the weathered barn, rather than the main farmhouse that the rest of the search team was approaching. Trusting his partner's instincts, Jonathan radioed for backup as he followed the dog's lead. The barn's exterior appeared unremarkable, but Maxton circled the concrete floor with growing intensity, scratching at a specific section near the back wall. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a hidden chamber extending far beyond what the barn's exterior dimensions suggested. Motion-activated lights flickered on automatically as they descended steep stairs into darkness, revealing a space that had been carefully designed and soundproofed. Metal shelving contained plastic storage containers, neatly labeled with dates. The forensic team worked methodically, photographing everything before disturbing the scene. When the first container was opened, the contents confirmed their worst fears: women's clothing, jewelry, and personal items catalogued with clinical precision. These were trophies, suggesting a collector rather than a disorganized killer. A hidden door at the back of the chamber revealed a smaller room containing video equipment and hard drives. Technical specialists immediately began securing the digital evidence as the extent of documentation became apparent. In the final container, marked with the most recent date, they found Samantha Peterson's nursing school application, half completed alongside her wallet and cell phone. Behind a carefully disguised panel, they discovered a narrow space containing a mattress, chains bolted to the wall, and scratch marks identical to those in Samantha's rental room. The message became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't merely a storage facility, but a prison that held multiple victims one after another over the course of years. Additional buildings on the property revealed similar setups. This wasn't the work of one man, but an operation involving multiple participants working in concert. The scale of the enterprise suggested organizational sophistication, far beyond anything they had initially imagined. The attack came without warning as Jonathan walked Maxton toward his apartment building. A black SUV accelerated silently from a side street, mounting the sidewalk directly in their path. Jonathan dove acidi as the vehicle struck a glancing blow to his side, sending him tumbling across the concrete. Maxton reacted instantaneously, lunging toward the vehicle as a man emerged from the passenger door, weapon raised. Jonathan heard the distinctive pop of a silenced handgun, followed by Maxton's agonized yelp. Ignoring the searing pain in his ribs, Jonathan drew his service weapon and returned fire as the SUV accelerated away, the bullets shattering its rear window before it disappeared around a corner. He crawled to where Maxton lay motionless on the pavement, blood pooling beneath the dog's powerful body. "Stay with me, boy," Jonathan pleaded, applying pressure to the wound as he called for emergency assistance. The veterinary trauma team worked on Maxton for 4 hours, while Jonathan paced the waiting room, his own injuries bandaged, but forgotten in his concern for his partner. The bullet had missed vital organs, but Maxton had lost a significant amount of blood. His condition stabilized enough for transfer to intensive care, though recovery remained uncertain. Before Jonathan could process the emotional toll of Maxton's injury, Captain Mayer arrived with devastating news. Jonathan was suspended effective immediately pending an internal review. Someone had filed a formal complaint alleging he had tampered with evidence to frame Hayes, citing past trauma from his sister's unsolved murder as motivation for a vendetta. His service weapon and badge were surrendered, access to the precinct restricted. The orchestrated attack effectively sidelined Jonathan at the critical moment when Hayes's operation was most vulnerable. Richard Peterson watched the news coverage of Jonathan's suspension with growing dismay from his hospital bed. Michelle, Samantha's mother, reluctantly agreed to meet with her ex-husband after learning of his cooperation with the police. Despite initial tension, a fragile connection formed between two people united by shared grief, for the remarkable young woman they had both lost in different ways. While planning how to continue what Samantha had started, they attended her memorial service at Lakeside Park. Hundreds gathered to honor Samantha and other identified victims. Michelle Peterson addressed the gathering with quiet dignity. "My daughter Samantha was not just taken from us. She was silenced while trying to expose a terrible truth. Today we speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves." Family representatives shared memories, creating a mosaic of lives cruelly interrupted. When Richard Peterson spoke, his raw honesty silenced murmurs. "I wasn't there for Samantha when she needed me in life, but I promised to be there for her now in death to ensure that those responsible face justice." After the service, Commissioner Mayer approached Jonathan with softened resolve. "Your suspension stands until the review board's decision next week. For what it's worth, I don't believe the allegations, but procedure must be followed." Timothy Wright's attendance at the memorial marked a turning point in their strained relationship. Recalling advice from college days, "Some battles choose you, not the other way around," they acknowledged Hayes was just one part of a larger operation. An unmarked envelope arrived at Jonathan's apartment exactly 1 week after the memorial service. Inside was a Hotel K card and a handwritten note in Timothy Wright's distinct penmanship. "Waldorf Astoria Room, 1932 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone. Destroy this. At precisely 8 p.m. Jonathan knocked on the hotel room door. Timothy opened it immediately, ushering him into a makeshift common center displaying surveillance footage and organized documents across every available surface. Timothy explained he had taken Hayes' case specifically to gather information law enforcement couldn't legally obtain. The risk was extraordinary, sacrificing his career, reputation, potentially his freedom to build a case against his own client. Hayes wasn't the top of the operation, Timothy revealed. He had been protected by someone with enough influence to shut down investigations, falsify records, manipulate evidence. Photographs showed Hayes meeting with Lawrence Eastman of Eastland Shipping, who reported directly to Senator William Brown, chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee. The implications were staggering. A sitting U.S. senator potentially involved in an international trafficking operation. Brown's committee oversaw port security, customs enforcement, transportation regulations, everything Hayes and Eastman needed to operate without scrutiny. In exchange, they provided financial support, manufactured evidence against political opponents, and handled personal matters the senator couldn't afford to be connected with. This explained the extraordinary protection Hayes had enjoyed over the years, the way allegations disappeared, investigations stalled, witnesses recanted. It wasn't just money or intimidation, but governmental power being wielded to shield criminal enterprises. Brown was untouchable through normal channels, but Hayes wasn't. He had been contacting Timothy seeking assurances about his legal exposure, scared and looking for options. With only 12 hours before Hayes moved again, Timothy provided a secured location in rural Virginia, where Hayes was currently hiding, awaiting extraction to a non-extradition country. The joint FBI local tactical team breached the remote hunting lodge before dawn. Gunn was the immaculate businessman from countless charity galas and corporate photographs, replaced by a hollow-eared fugitive surrounded by half-packed suitcases and multiple burner phones. Hayes offered no resistance during the arrest, his expression registering resignation rather than surprise. Initial interrogation yielded little as Hayes retreated behind legal protections and demands to speak with counsel, though specifically not Timothy Wright. The breakthrough came 36 hours into his detention when evidence recovered from the lodge was presented, a laptop containing encrypted communications with Eastman, detailed records of their operation, and most damning, a video call between Hayes and Senator Brown discussing the Samantha Peterson problem 3 days before her disappearance. Faced with this evidence and the prospect of multiple life sentences, Hayes's calculated risk assessment visibly shifted. "I want immunity," he stated flatly. "Full protection, new identity, relocation." But his arrogance dissolved into genuine fear as he continued, "If I talk, I'm dead. Brown has people everywhere, corrections officers, federal marshals, even your agency." Over the next 72 hours, Hayes provided a comprehensive account of the operation's evolution, beginning 15 years earlier when Brown, then a state senator with national ambitions, approached Hayes with a proposition involving custom importation permits for his transportation company. The initial arrangements seemed merely corrupt rather than criminal. Regulatory shortcuts, inspection exemptions, campaign contributions laundered through shell companies. But Brown's demands escalated, alongside his political rise, drawing Hayes deeper into a web of blackmail and coercion. Hayes insisted he was a reluctant participant rather than an enthusiastic perpetrator, but his detailed testimony provided something more valuable: a comprehensive map of the entire criminal enterprise, from recruitment to transport to disposal. Most significantly, he provided the location of a private server containing blackmail material Brown had accumulated against dozens of officials, ensuring their continued cooperation or silence. When FBI cybersecurity experts accessed the server, they discovered evidence implicating judges, law enforcement commanders, customs officials, and politicians across multiple jurisdictions. The true extent of the corruption that had protected the operation for years became apparent. Disturbing connections emerged to similar operations in other regions, suggesting a network far larger than initially imagined. Hayes' cooperation offered a rare opportunity to dismantle not just one criminal enterprise, but potentially several interconnected operations exploiting vulnerable victims across national boundaries. Maxton's condition had stabilized enough for transfer to a veterinary rehabilitation facility. Jonathan visited daily during his continued suspension, spending hours simply sitting beside his partner. Sometimes he read case files aloud. Other times they sat in silent contemplation. On the third day, as Jonathan was preparing to leave, Maxton suddenly lifted his head, ears forward, in a posture of alert attention focused on the doorway. Jonathan turned to find the hallway empty, but Maxton's intensity didn't waver, his gaze fixed on a specific point in empty space. The senior veterinarian offered a gentle explanation. Working dogs often have heightened perception, some detecting changes in electromagnetic fields, others responding to subtle environmental shifts we can't perceive. Jonathan nodded, though privately wondering if Maxton's awareness extended beyond scientific explanation into realms he preferred not to contemplate too deeply. Later that evening, following another internal affairs interview regarding his conduct during the Hayes investigation, Jonathan returned to his apartment to find an unexpected package delivered to his door. A carved wooden box containing an antique silver whistle engraved with Maxton's name and badge number. The accompanying note reads simply, "For when he returns to duty, MP." The gesture from Mitchell Peterson provided something Jonathan had begun to loathe during his suspension: hope that both he and Maxton might eventually return to the work that defined them. That night, reviewing expanded case files provided by Timothy despite ongoing restrictions on his official involvement, Jonathan noticed a property listing in Hayes's financial disclosures that hadn't appeared in previous records: a remote cabin near the Virginia-West Virginia border purchased through yet another shell company 7 years earlier. The omission from Hayes's otherwise comprehensive cooperation struck Jonathan as significant. The response came the following morning. Satellite imagery showed the property had been recently accessed despite its supposed abandonment, with tire tracks and disturbed vegetation visible from aerial surveillance. More concerning, thermal imaging detected a heat signature consistent with human presence inside the supposedly vacant structure. Federal agents prepared to investigate as Jonathan received an unexpected call from Captain Meyer. "Your suspension is lifted effective immediately. The commissioner wants you on site when they breach that cabin." The ballistics from Maxton's shooting matched an unsolved murder of a whistleblower in the Eastland shipping case from 3 years ago. It seemed Maxton had been shot by a professional hitter connected to the organization Jonathan had been chasing. The revelation transformed what might have been merely another property, seizure into something potentially more significant. The cabin might not be just another Hayes hideout, but a location important enough to protect with deadly force. The joint FBI local law enforcement operation to breach the remote cabin proceeded with methodical precision at dawn. Tactical teams secured the perimeter while negotiators attempted contact with whoever might be inside. Despite thermal imaging confirming human presence, there was no response from within during the 3-hour standoff. When the tactical team finally executed the breach, they encountered no resistance, just an elderly groundskeeper who had been maintaining the property in Hayes's absence. The man surrendered peacefully, explaining he had no knowledge of his employer's criminal activities, merely following instructions to keep the cabin ready for occasional use. Initial sweeps revealed nothing extraordinary. Standard furnishings, well-stocked pantry, generator backup, a comfortable retreat rather than an operational center. Jonathan felt crushing disappointment until one of the FBI agents reported an anomaly in the floor measurements. The cabin's interior dimensions didn't match its exterior footprint, suggesting hidden space. Behind a bookcase in the study, they discovered a biometric lock requiring Hayes' fingerprint. After consultation with prosecutors, Hayes was transported to the site under heavy guard, his grudging cooperation secured with additional concessions regarding his eventual sentencing and incarceration location. The hidden room revealed behind the secured door contained exactly what Hayes had most carefully concealed. Not additional evidence of his crimes, but documentation of his victimization by others. Meticulously organized files detailed how Senator Brown had systematically compromised Hayes through a combination of blackmail, bribery, and threats against his family. Most significantly, the room contained server backups preserving evidence that Hayes had been ordered to withhold during his cooperation incriminating communications involving individuals even more powerful than Brown, extending into international diplomatic and financial circles. "This is why I kept it separate," Hayes explained as the evidence was catalogued. "Because I knew they'd eventually sacrifice me to protect themselves." The scope of the conspiracy expanded dramatically with each file analyzed, revealing a network spanning multiple countries, but involving officials at the highest levels of government and business. Within 48 hours, coordinated arrests began across 3 continents, dismantling not merely a single trafficking operation, but an entire infrastructure that had facilitated human exploitation for decades. Senator Brown was taken into custody while attempting to board a private jet to a non-extradition country. His dignified facade crumbled as federal agents led him past assembled media. The investigation that had begun with a dog's reaction to a suitcase culminated in one of the largest human trafficking prosecutions in modern history, with over 60 individuals indicted across multiple jurisdictions. During the subsequent press conference, the FBI directors specifically acknowledged Jonathan Wright and Maxton as the catalysts whose persistence had unraveled a criminal enterprise that conventional investigations had repeatedly failed to penetrate. 6 months after the cabin raid, Maxton's rehabilitation progressed beyond even the most optimistic projections. The specialized veterinary facility employed innovative therapies from hydrotherapy to laser treatments, gradually restoring strength and mobility to the wounded German Shepherd. Jonathan visited daily, participating in rehabilitation exercises and monitoring every incremental improvement. The journey from near death to recovery strengthened the already profound bond between handler and dog, each seeming to understand the other's determination to return to work together. On the day Maxton was finally cleared for discharge, the veterinary staff lined the hallway in an impromptu honor guard, applauding as the German Shepherd walked out under his own power, still favoring his injured side, but moving with growing confidence. The department approved his return to limited duty. No field operations yet, but scent training, evidence review, getting him back into the routine gradually. What Jonathan didn't mention was his own gradual healing, the nightmares that had plagued him since Caroline's death occurring less frequently now, obsessive case reviews giving way to occasional evenings spent simply existing without the weight of unsolved crimes pressing upon him. At police headquarters, Maxton received a hero's welcome. Officers paused their duties to greet the returning Kuhdiksan officer with treats, pats, and sincere appreciation from colleagues who understood exactly how close they had come to losing him. Captain Mayer arranged a small ceremony in the briefing room, presenting Maxton with a special commendation medal that Jonathan attached to his service collar, not just for the Hayes case, but for every case where his instincts led them to justice when conventional methods failed. Richard Peterson stood quietly at the back of the room, his presence a reminder of all the case had cost and revealed. After the ceremony, Peterson approached tentatively, still carrying the weight of his past failures but standing straighter now, a man finding purpose in the wake of tragedy. Mitchell and he were starting a foundation using Samantha's life insurance money and his savings to support families of trafficking victims, legal assistance, support services, whatever they needed. The initiative represented not merely financial support, but Peterson's commitment to honoring his daughter's memory by continuing her work exposing exploitation and supporting survivors. During the ceremony honoring the task force responsible for dismantling the trafficking network, representatives from multiple agencies gathered to recognize extraordinary service in an investigation that had exposed corruption at the highest levels while recovering dozens of victims still being held in locations identified through Hayes' testimony. When the commissioner called Jonathan forward to receive the department's highest commendation, the assembled officers rose in a standing ovation, not merely for the Hayes case, but for a career spent pursuing justice for victims who might otherwise have been forgotten. Timothy Wright received no public acknowledgement, but his crucial role necessarily remained confidential to protect attorney-client privilege. Technicalities that might jeopardize prosecutions meant his sacrifice. A distinguished legal career ended by ethical violations that could not be publicly justified, represented a different kind of courage that few beyond Jonathan would ever fully appreciate. After the formal proceedings concluded, Jonathan visited the memorial garden established to honor Samantha Peterson and the other identified victims. Michelle Peterson was already there, tending the flowering plants that surrounded her daughter's plaque. "I thought I might find you here," she said without looking up, recognizing his footsteps. They sat in comfortable silence, watching butterflies move between the memorial plantings. "Richard told me they're starting prosecution against Brown next month," Michelle finally said. "They want me to testify about Samantha." Jonathan nodded, understanding both the necessity and the pain such testimony would involve, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. "You don't have to do it alone," he assured her. "We encompass the extended community that has formed around the case: law enforcement, victims' families, survivors, advocates, who have transformed individual grief into collective purpose." Mikkel smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes in a way Jonathan had not witnessed during their earliest interactions. Samantha would have liked that. She never wanted to fight her battles alone, just couldn't find the right allies until it was too late. As the afternoon light softened toward evening, a police dispatcher's voice crackled over Jonathan's radio requesting critics and assistance for a possible missing person case. Maxton immediately rose to attention, ears forward, body language shifting from relaxation to readiness with practiced efficiency. Jonathan exchanged a glance with Michelle, who nodded her understanding. "Go," she said simply. "That's what Samantha would want, for you to keep finding the ones who still have a chance." Jonathan and Maxton walked purposefully toward the waiting vehicle, their synchronized movement reflecting years of partnership. As they approached the scene where a young woman had last been seen, Maxton's behavior shifted, alert, focused, determined. Jonathan recognized the change immediately, trusting his partner's instinct just as he had that day at the airport when a seemingly routine baggage screening had unraveled a criminal enterprise. The work continued as it always had, with each case an opportunity to prevent another tragedy, to find another missing person before they became another memorial plaque. For Jonathan Wright and Maxton, the most fitting honor for those already lost was to save those who still could be found, one investigation at a time, for as long as they were able to serve. In Jonathan and Maxton's journey, we find echoes of our own lives, the persistent pursuit of justice against overwhelming odds, the healing power of purpose after devastating loss, and the irreplaceable value of loyal companionship. As we enter our golden years, many of us carry unresolved questions and unfulfilled quests from earlier chapters of our lives. Samantha Peterson's story reminds us that it's never too late to seek truth, and that our accumulated wisdom and determination can be powerful forces for good in this world. The connections formed through shared purpose between Jonathan and Maxton, Mitchell and Richard, and all those touched by Samantha's courage show us that even in our darkest moments, community becomes our strongest lifeline. Like Detective Wright, we may find that the deepest healing comes not from forgetting our past wounds, but from transforming them into meaningful action that protects others from similar suffering. Remember, our most profound legacy isn't measured in accolades or possessions, but in the lives we've touched and the wrongs we've helped to right. The journey continues, one step at a time, for as long as we're able to serve.